The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee will now begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Jenkins, and I am the chair of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee. I'm going to call to order our regular committee meeting for Wednesday, October 14th. I will note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Rake.
Here.
Gordon.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Cunningham.
Present.
Osman. Here. Goodman.
Present.
Kano.
Here.
Bender.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Palmisano.
Present.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Present.
Chair Jenkins.
Here.
There are 13 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have quorum. Colleagues, we have 18 items on the agenda today, including a presentation and 3 discussion items. At the end of the agenda, I will ask committee chairs if they have any items of note that that have come through their committee that council members may want to be particularly aware of. So if that is an issue, please be prepared to provide updates from your committees at that time. Going forward, we will institute going back to our regularly process of having committee reports at POGO starting next cycle. So today we have 18 items on the agenda, and we'll begin with item number 1, which is a public hearing on an ordinance extending the term of the existing cable franchise agreement with CenturyLink from June 30, 2020 to December 16th, 2020. And we'll start with a staff presentation. And I believe that it will be introduced by C. John Harrison in the Communications Department. Mr. Harrison?
Thank you, Chair Jenkins, committee members. CJ Harrison from the Communications Department. The item before you is amending the Minneapolis Cable Communications Franchise, Appendix H, Chapter 2, between the City of Minneapolis and CenturyLink, extending the term of the existing cable franchise agreement to December 16th, 2020. Here to give a brief presentation is our cable attorney, Mike Bradley.
Thank you, CJ, and good afternoon, council members. Like CJ said, my name is Mike Bradley. I'm with Bradley Law, and I've been the longtime outside counsel of the City of Minneapolis on cable franchising matters. Today we have what I think is a very simple cable franchise amendment to the CenturyLink cable franchise that extends the cable franchise through December 16th of 2020. And today we're going to have a public hearing on this. And I'd like to give you just a brief background of the CenturyLink franchise and then show you what we're changing on the existing cable franchise for CenturyLink. And if CJ, you'd go to the next slide, please. So just for the public's background and your background, council members, CenturyLink and the City of Minneapolis entered into a franchise agreement in May of 2015. It was for a 5-year term. A while back, CenturyLink indicated that it was going to be terminating its cable service. And as a result, we ended up entering into a settlement agreement between the city and CenturyLink in April of 2020 here. And we addressed three primary issues in that settlement agreement. First was the protection of cable subscribers. We required a 60-day notice of termination of service to all subscribers. We required CenturyLink to provide information on how to replace their cable services. And then we also required that that subscribers not be charged for any equipment return if it was made within 30 days of termination of service. We also had provisions protecting the city relating to any facilities that CenturyLink had that was for the provision of cable services only. We don't think there are many, if any, facilities that are only related to the provision of cable service, but we did address that in the settlement agreement. And finally, we addressed the termination of the franchise itself and require that CenturyLink waive any renewal rights that it would have under the Federal Cable Act so that the city wouldn't incur any additional expenses. In September of 2020, CenturyLink provided a notice of intent to terminate Prism Television, and that termination date is December 16th. In that notice, the notice was consistent with the settlement agreement in how subscribers would return equipment. So CenturyLink will be providing mailing kits for subscribers to mail back their equipment to CenturyLink at no cost to the subscriber. But subscribers aren't required to return the equipment. They won't be charged any fees if they do not, but they will be responsible for disposing of that equipment if they choose that option. Similar notices were given throughout the Twin Cities to all the different franchising authorities, all relating to a December 16th termination date. I should note that CenturyLink, while they're terminating their cable service products, they will continue to provide internet and phone services in the city as they have been for many years. This is a nationwide development for CenturyLink. They are terminating cable service across the country between now and the first quarter of 2021. CJ, you go to the next slide, please. So what the proposed franchise extension ordinance will do is really, it couldn't be any simpler. We're simply deleting the old termination date and inserting a new one, and that's December 16th, 2020, which is consistent with how CenturyLink is terminating its service across the Twin Cities footprint. And again, it's to give CenturyLink more time to repair customers for the termination of its cable service, but then also to allow the cable service to terminate across the Twin Cities area all at the same time on December 16th, 2020. And really that's it. I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise we would, it'd be a call to open the public hearing.
Hey, you want to pop in there and answer?
Did anybody ask any questions? If they did, I did not hear a question.
I'm sorry. Are there any questions for the presenter? And thank you for that background.
Yes.
Seeing none from my colleagues, I will go ahead and then open the public hearing. And I don't believe there's anyone registered as of 1:39. Have we had anybody sign up to speak to this issue?
No, Chair, there are no persons wish to speak.
Is there anyone here to speak to the public hearing? Seeing none, I will now close the public hearing and move approval of this item. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing no discussion, I will ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion to approve.
Councilmember Rake.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osman.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Wait, stop. Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries, and that recommendation will be referred to the City Council meeting on Friday for final action. Next, we have our consent agenda, which is items 2 through 15 on the agenda. Items number 2 through 11 are various contract amendments for the public service building project, and the details of which are listed on the agenda. Item number 12 is the acceptance of a bid from RJM Printing for signs and wayfinding for the public service building project. Item number 13 is an image license agreement with the Star Tribune for use of images at PB Plaza. Item number 14 is a contract amendment with the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis for an economic study, economic impact study for the city's minimum wage ordinance. I will note that staff submitted a revised request for committee action today that extends the contract through 2025 instead of 2028 as was listed on our LIMS agenda. Staff is on hand if anyone has any questions regarding that. And then item number 15 is authorizing the city attorney's office to prepare or join an amicus brief on behalf of the ACLU of Minnesota in a case pending before the Minnesota Court of Appeals, which deals with the voting rights of convicted felons. Would any of my colleagues wish to pull any of these items from today's consent agenda? No. Seeing none, then I will go ahead and move approval of the consent agenda, including the revision as mentioned on item number 14. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to now call the roll on the consent agenda.
Councilmember Rake.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osman.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye. Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That item carries and the consent agenda is approved. So for discussion, colleagues, item number 16 is related to the retirement incentive plans for 2020 and 21. We did have a presentation on this item in our last meeting, but the body continued it for one cycle so that staff could do more work on this proposed incentive plan. And Ms. Kruger from our Human Resources Department is on hand to update us on this item. Ms. Kruger, are you available?
I am. Good afternoon, Council Vice President Jenkins, City Council members. Again, my name is Deb Kruger. I'm with the Human Resources Department. I do have a brief presentation to give to you this afternoon on the retirement incentive plan for city employees, starting in 2020, continuing into 2021. Next slide, please. Just as a quick summary overview, the 2020 Early Retirement Incentive Plan was originally presented at the September 30th Policy and Government Oversight Committee meeting. Delayed one committee cycle. We did have to resolve an issue with a conflicting existing retirement incentive and one collective bargaining agreement, which has since been resolved. Next slide. And over the last 2 weeks, as we were resolving that potential conflict with sort of double dipping with retirement incentives, we did have an opportunity to hear from some employees who watched the last POGO meeting and provided some feedback to the Human Resources Department, and really the sort of the consistent message that we got. And again, it wasn't a great deal. It was, less than a dozen employees, but their one common concern was around what they felt was a short timeline to make a sort of a life-changing decision and immediate separation by the end of the year. So as we talked through that, we are coming today with some resolution amendments, 3 resolution amendments that we would like to have considered for final approval at the City Council meeting on Friday. Change number 1 is extending the timeline for plans 1 and 2. And just as a reminder, plan 1 is called Rule of 75 for all city employees, except for those that are designated as emergency responders and our employees in public works. And again, the change in timeline is to extend the consideration period and separation period by 30 days. And that was in direct response to that employee feedback that we received. And again, we took kind of a balanced approach in looking at how long of an extension we should provide. And the balanced approach is looking at, sort of the employee's needs to have what is considered in para the best planning is 3 months for retirement planning and the needs that for employees in that arena, as well as balancing the enterprise needs and realizing additional cost savings through vacancies in 2021. And felt that 3-month consideration period, which is the advice of para, our pension plan. And so extending it out 30 days would give roughly a 3-month consideration period. So that is the first change in the resolution. So it would change the 3-month consideration period from employees would have from mid-October when we mail out the incentive plan to eligible employees, mid-October through mid-January to opt in or to think about it and make a decision. And then the deadline for opting in would be January 11th instead of December, I believe it was December 20th previously. And then allow for a later retirement date instead of December 31st of 2020. It would last separation date would be January 29th of 2021. Next slide. The second amendment change to the resolutions, it was for all 3 plans. And again, it was just, it was things that came up over the last 2 weeks, and they're very minor changes. But the first one was redefining what full-time employee means, which is one of the criteria to be eligible for the retirement plan. And this would be for all three plans, and it was really just changing the one sentence to make it consistent with how full-time is defined in the collective bargaining agreements. So the specific change was to change it to say from full-time employees are those who are 0.80 or greater FTE to employees who work a standard working 30 hours or more per week. It does not change the eligibility numbers. It just makes the language consistent with our collective bargaining agreements. And then the last change was at the advice of our legal department to add in a clause around what would happen should an employee separate under the retirement incentive and become deceased prior to payment of incentive. And so we added some language in that should that happen, if an employee should die after separation, but before payment, it would be paid out to the employee's estate. So just to cover that legal aspect. So those are the three changes that we are proposing to the resolutions that were presented at the last POGO meeting. And then the next slide, it's just a revised timeline. We're looking, hoping to have, City Council move this move to City Council for adoption on Friday, October 16th, at which point we would begin all employee communications on the plans. October 21st, we would plan to send all eligibility notices to eligible employees to their home address on Wednesday, October 21st, which starts their notification period. We would hold a couple of information sessions with employees in November. And then between December 7th and January 11th would be the timeline in which employees eligible for plans 1 and 2 could submit their participation form to Human Resources to opt into the retirement. With possible separation dates, retirement dates ranging from as early as December 23rd to as late as January 29th. And then the last slide would be just, it's not even really a revised timeline, but just a reminder of the revised timeline for Plan 3, which is very specific to certain employees in the Public Works Department who by and large support our winter operations of snow and ice removal. The only change here would be we originally stated that we would send eligibility documents to their homes no later than February 8th, and we are bumping that up to give them a 30-day consideration period as well. So we're looking at sending those documents out to those employees in early January instead of early February, and then holding information sessions in January. The rest of the timeline is the same. Employees would submit their participation form late March to early April with retirement dates between April 14th and April 30th. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kruger. Looks like we do have a question or a comment from Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I do have a question. One of the concerns I've heard from employees that would qualify for these plans was that they wouldn't take the early retirement because they would lose too much from their para accounts. Could you talk a little bit more about that and and let us know if that's been addressed?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Schrader, I'm not sure I understand the question or what the concern is. Lose too much from their para accounts.
Oh, no problem. Basically, it was someone that because of their age, they wouldn't get the full payout from their para account until they reach age 66. So if they took early retirement, they would be not getting the full amount. They would lose too much they would in essence seem to be retiring early, or at least that was their understanding of that. Maybe you could speak a little bit more to that concerns or talk a little bit if that has been worked out or how that kind of meshes so they're not losing. So there's no, I just want to make sure there isn't a disincentive for these plans for taking early retirement.
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilmember Schrader. I can certainly follow up with our benefits director, but my understanding, it isn't, it is an early retirement incentive. Generally, individuals who would consider taking this. You know, they've been thinking about retirement or thinking about retiring, you know, soon. For instance, I'll use myself as a personal example. I am also eligible. I am nowhere near retirement age, though, from an age perspective, but I've got the years of service with the city. And while I could certainly take the incentive because I am eligible under a rule of 75, my election would be not to draw my monthly pension amount. I'd keep my money in para and then decide to withdraw that money and start taking my monthly para pension when I reached an age where it's an unreduced amount, you know, whether that's age 62, 65, 66, from whenever you were, you know, whenever you were hired, if you were hired under rule of 90 or something else. So that is up to the employee whether or not they want to draw their pension amount. Yes, at the age 55, it is reduced pension amount, but they can leave their money in para and start drawing that pension amount when they choose.
Thank you for that. And just as a follow-up, have you were kind of considered a phased retirement? Because this was a suggestion of the employee where that's something they would look to because of that, working less at a reduced amount and kind of like easing into retirement, but still having kind of that as an option, assuming that they would still that their goal would be to realize the full pair of benefits.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember Schrader, phased retirement is already an option at the city. And the employee would just simply have to work with their department. It is approval is at the discretion of the department, and so there's a form on City Talk, you know, an application that they can fill out and have that conversation with their department around phased retirement. That is already an option.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions? Seeing none, I will go ahead and move approval of this item. I do want to thank staff as they work through the many details and address some of the concerns that employees expressed. Very responsive, and we really appreciate that. I will move approval with the revisions as presented by staff. And seeing no further discussion, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Chair,
Madam
it
Chair.
looks like Councilmember Palmisano wants to comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to mention something that has really just come up here in the last 24 hours, and you are the author of this resolution. But I did want to point out that as we work on things with finance about like payout and payroll issues, there are some windows of time that if some of these retirements take place, that we might want to adjust the language in this resolution slightly to set clear expectations as to when people that choose to retire with this incentive will actually be paid out. As you all know, the city is processing thousands of tax forms in January, and one of our goals overall with this retirement incentive was to save money as a city long-term. So incurring a lot of overtime in order to get some of these payments out isn't really going to be consistent with those goals. So we might need a slight modification based on sorting out some of the legal pieces here, but I think that the expectation that we should be setting with people who choose this retirement incentive should be to pay out no later than February 26th. But I just want to absolutely make that clear, and I understand that our finance and legal team have some additional work to do on it. So I'm just saying that come Friday, we might have some technical amendments to this piece, and I wanted to make sure that my colleagues were aware.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Is there any additional discussion related to that update? Any other discussion? Seeing none, then I will now ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
And that item carries, and the committee's recommendation will be forwarded to Friday's council meeting for final action. And we will likely hear some technical amendments from Councilmember Palmisano at that meeting. Item number 17 is the 2020 CARES Act funding update. And I will invite staff to provide that presentation. I'm just not clear what staff that is. Is it Matthew Bauer?
Correct, Council Vice President Jenkins. Matt Bauer here. Committee members, I'm Matt Bauer, Manager of Resource Coordination in the Finance and Property Services Department. And today we are bringing forward to the committee the acceptance and appropriation of Federal CARES Act coronavirus relief funds for the city of Minneapolis. Staff will be requesting the acceptance of these funds, passage of a resolution appropriating these funds to the city's non-departmental grant agency, authorizing any necessary agreements to implement any transfer of funds to other entities, and authorizing the finance officer to make any necessary appropriation adjustments to allow departments to receive and spend the funds. I will run through the background on these coronavirus relief funds and the process and rules associated with their receipt, and wrap up with a summary of the latest recognized and planned expenditure items eligible under the grant. Finance Officer Deshani Dye, Lori Johnson, and Micah Intermill are also on the call, I believe, to assist in answering any questions following the presentation. Next slide, please. So the federal coronavirus relief funds, or CRF funds, were made through the CARES Act passed by Congress at the end of March. The $32 million of CRF for which Minneapolis receives was made available by the state of Minnesota only at the end of June. Hennepin County received a direct federal allocation of $221 million shortly after passage of the CARES Act in March. And the CARES Act sets forth eligible expense criteria for these funds. These CRF funds that the city received of $32 million are in addition to other grants made available to the city through the CARES Act listed on the next slide. Next slide, please. The $32 million of CRF is a portion of the near $58 million the city has received from the CARES Act in total. Much of the balance of $25 million in non-CRF funding supports COVID-19 response programming support in the community, for example, assistance to homelessness in housing support initiatives, and community health projects. And these other grants have been before the council over the past several months. The CRF allocation plan is to reimburse extraordinary costs already incurred by the city enterprise due to COVID-19 and recognizes that much of the new direct expenses related to COVID-19 community response can be supported through the other CARES Act funding, such as ESG and CDBG. These funds have a longer time frame for spending, as seen in the last column on the chart with performance period end dates. These other awards have performance periods beyond 2020, allowing the city to provide a longer term response than what is possible with CRF funds. Next slide. In terms of timeline, to briefly review the timeline associated with these funds, Minneapolis's share again was $32 million, for which the city made claim for back in July, the first week of July. And under state rules, the city must recognize and incur eligible expenditures by November 15th, or else turn over any balance to the Hennepin County Medical Center or another hospital in Hennepin County by the time of our final report to the state on these funds due on November 24th. I should say that the city will not need to return any funds to HCMC, as we plan to have more than enough expenses to apply to the funding. Next slide. Thank you. So as noted, all city expenditures to be charged against these funds must be incurred by November 15th. CRF funds can only be used on expenditures that meet the following criteria set forth in the CARES Act. First is necessary expenditures incurred due to the coronavirus public health emergency, and this can include public health and safety payroll costs. 2, expenses not accounted for in the approved city budget as of March 27th. And finally, expenses that were incurred or obligated between March 1st and November 15th of this year. If there are any obligated costs that do not become spent, we can still allocate other expense line items so we do not lose any of this funding provided through the CRF source. U.S. Treasury and State of Minnesota has classified the necessary expenditures into eligibility categories, which I'll briefly outline. And these categories are based on a monthly report that the city submits to the state. First, though, I will outline the general program allocation categories of these potential CRF expenditures. Next slide, please. These are the broad expense items that allowable under the CRF grant that Minneapolis is seeking to apply to its award. These categories are consistent with past mayoral public health emergency declarations and the City Council's resolution on COVID-19 response priorities of the enterprise. They are also balanced against other COVID-19 resources that the city has received. The city's grants team and finance reports on actual expenditures monthly by allocating any eligible costs into the eligible categories as expressed in the Treasury and State of Minnesota guidance. This next slide, the final slide, shows the current and planned spending by category. This chart illustrates the city's expenditures that have been both recognized and planned that can be applied against the CRF award. The expenses listed in the September 2020 column, which is the second column after the eligible criteria or category, these were provided in the latest report to the state. The column for incurred planned expenditures are eligible costs that have been identified likely to be able to be claimed for eligibility and have either been incurred to date but not submitted for the report, or are anticipated to be incurred by mid-November. Finally, the obligated column is estimated future costs that have not been incurred but consist of some type of commitment to do so. This includes, as you see, some contact tracing costs that this health department has incurred or anticipates incurring over the next several weeks. Unemployment benefits, which we are currently paying out on, and we expect additional unemployment costs due to employees that have either been laid off or furloughed or have lost or have been laid off prior to the coronavirus, but are currently still receiving unemployment expenses from the city, and due to their inability to find work in the current economic environment, are still eligible to receive that from the city. I will note that all the eligible expenditures that could be charged to the CRF funds will exceed the amount of funding available, the $32 million. And with that said, I'll conclude for any questions that you may have on, and again, there's other finance staff on the call as well that can assist me in answering any of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Are there any questions? There is a request to be able to see the last slide. Can we just lead that up? And then there is a question or comment from Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that this reflects work from the enterprise and that a lot of the kind of funding decisions have come through council by way of the mayor's reports on decisions being made under the emergency declaration. I do think it's notable that a lot of the costs are related to city expenses, internal expenses, and that there isn't much direct investment in community related supports reflected here. And again, knowing this probably isn't directed at you, Mr. Bauer, but across the enterprise, I just wondered if there is someone who can answer the question about how staff has come with this recommendation or this perhaps now backward-looking summary of the decisions that have been made to focus the funding internally and to really not have reflected here direct investments in community related to the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Council President, and I share those same concerns and wondering, is there anyone to answer that question?
So, Madam Chair and Council President, I could answer that if you would like. Micah, Intermill City Budget Director. So, as Mr. Bauer indicated at the beginning of his presentation, this slide represents 32 million of a total 57 million, 58 million received through the CARES Act in total. So separating the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF, that you see at the top of the slide from the CARES Act in total. The other portions, which included additional community development block grant, emergency solutions grant, things related to the elections this year, all of that, I would say that the vast majority of that spending is indeed outward community facing, and so it's an interesting juxtaposition to be sure, but I think assuming that this is the full picture of CARES Act expenditure from the city, would give a misleading answer. And I think it's good that the council president highlighted that so that we can again emphasize that there are these other CARES Act dollars that are not directly in the CRF designation.
Thank you, Mr. Intermill, and I know that Councilmember Cunningham is in queue, but just as a follow-up, so would these expenses have come from the general fund, if not for the CRF, or? I mean, if not for the coronavirus period, we wouldn't have most of these expenses. However, coronavirus is a real thing, and we would have had to either spend this from our general fund or not do it. Is that correct?
So, Madam Chair, that's absolutely correct. And I think the only other piece that I would add to my previous answer was, there has been a team of folks from the Finance and Property Services Department, as well as Office of Emergency Management, that have been literally combing through every expenditure to identify which bucket, for lack of a better term, should be used for each expense. And as Mr. Bauer's earlier slide noted, those other sources of funding, those other buckets that are provided through the CARES Act, thank you, have end dates that are farther out into the future. And so, there's a lot of strategy that goes into this to make sure that we're spending all of the dollars by the dates that we need to get them spent by. And so, yes, you're absolutely right, Madam Chair, that the general fund would have picked up a lot of these expenses, or we just simply wouldn't have been able to make the expenditures, but for being able to participate in this funding.
Okay.
And
Councilmember Cunningham.
I think somebody else was going to respond.
Was there someone else responding?
Chair Jenkins and committee members, I was just going to add that there are within these costs that you see on the last slide, there is city work that is being done in the community that we are applying to these dollars. They just don't, it's not broken out though as internal versus external, but it's paying for health department time going out to do testing events and doing doing education out in the community on coronavirus. So those are being captured under the line for public health expenses. There's also under the COVID-19 testing and contact tracing. And then there's other smaller pieces in the other eligible items that are out in the community, is city work out in the community in support of the community, but it's just not it's not broken out that way. But I will say, I mean, a lot of this is for internal operations, support of that, and just to that we're incurring extraordinary costs due to the coronavirus itself.
Thank you for that input. I'm wondering, is some of the PPE, is that being distributed to community as well, or is that simply internal? If you have,
I can respond to that.
Deshani
Dye, CFO. There is $1.4 million currently spent on PPE alone. So yes, it is part of the CRF funding. I was also going to note that these expenses that we have incurred to date and also planned are not binding. We do have flexibility in reappropriating any of these dollars. That's part of the authority that is listed on the resolution. As the CFO, I do have the ability to move planned expenditures. And what we were hoping to do was at the end of the year, depending on how the expenses are incurred, and making some adjustment at year end to give us more flexibility. Just didn't want you to think that any of these categories are binding in any way with the action taken today.
That's good to know. Councilmember Cunningham. Thanks for your patience. Appreciate it.
No, thank you, everyone. Sorry for my dogs having the perfect timing. So thank you all for this presentation. This has been helpful to see it all in one space. I read through the RCA and just was hoping to get some clarification about what qualifies within the payroll for public health and safety employees, because as was mentioned, some of the public health expenses are related to staff time and some of the COVID testing, and contact tracing is related to public health staff time. So I'm curious as to what qualifies for payroll that is covered, and is it possible to get, like, are those numbers also disaggregated between public health and safety, because those are two actually like very rather different areas for our employees to be working. So I'm just curious about what falls into what.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, we can certainly disaggregate the numbers for you. I don't believe we have them ready for you today. This question is a good question, and it's been sort of some of the most widely discussed in the public finance community since the CARES Act was passed, because the guidance has been evolving over time, and the September guidance received, again, just as we think about timelines, yes, the CARES Act was passed in the spring, but it wasn't until 9/21 guidance that the federal government was clear that as an administrative, in their language, an administrative accommodation, local governments can presume that public health and public safety employees meet the substantially dedicated test. So public health and public safety employees are assumed to be working enough of their time on COVID to, under this federal guidance, be assumed that it is a COVID expense. And so that's, like I said, it's an item that's been moving, and we've been watching it carefully. I think in terms of, while I don't have the numbers disaggregated for you, the sort of priority for dollars has been public health, then fire, then police. And that sort of matches what you would expect in terms of who is spending most of their time on those activities. I think the other thing to keep in mind is a lot of our public health payroll, our health department does a great job of finding external funding for a lot of the innovative work that they do. And so we want to be very careful not to double count payroll. And so that's also part of what takes some time to make sure that all of the expenses are separated properly.
Madam Chair, if I may ask a follow-up.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for that, Director Intermel. That's very helpful to understand. So I guess what is the $1.4 million that is allocated particularly for MPD. Is that for PPE? Is that for staff time? I know that the fire department has brought in separate dollars for PPE through other grants. So I'm just curious if that's what these expenses were used to cover.
So I might defer to one of my other finance colleagues to answer that question.
Thank you. I hope it's not too nitpicky. I'm just curious about how that, what if that was used more towards PPE or if it was for payroll. So, thank you.
Chair Jenkins and Councilmember Cunningham, Matt Bauer here. If you are looking at the 1.4 million for the Department of Justice that you see on the slide on the screen here, my understanding is that is I'm not sure if that is entirely for payroll. I know a lot of it is for PPE in the department, as well as cleaning, doing the disinfectant of the vehicles after runs and such. And again, that is, in terms of whether we've captured any of those costs up front in the CRF funding, and then putting some of those potential costs that could be incurred in the future down the line for that particular grant. I'd have to go into details for that, but my understanding is that the general grant that the police department received from the Department of Justice, as well as the health department, is for primarily for PPE and kind of equipment disinfection and such.
Okay.
Council Vice President Jenkins, this is Lori Johnson. I can add a little bit to that. As you notice, the end date for that grant is 2022. So we are working with the police department to maximize the CARES funding for PPE, charging it to the 32 million, making sure that we leave as much of the $1.4 million available for future purchases going out to 2022. So we're carefully mapping each of those expenditures to maximize our grant dollars. And we have not charged payroll costs to that 1.4 million that I'm aware of.
Would the PPE that is being covered by MPD, would that fall within the, I'm sorry, can we turn it to the next slide with the CRF? Yeah. So would that then go under the personal protective equipment, and that stays separate from the I'm assuming the payroll for public health and safety employees?
Yes, Council Vice President Jenkins, Councilmember Cunningham, yes. It is reported under the PPE, would be separate from the public safety payroll costs.
I figured as much. Okay. I would like to be able to see it disaggregated between public health, fire, and the police department, just because I'm curious about the various payroll needs in the department, specifically related to the departments related specifically to COVID. So yeah, so that information would be really appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson and Councilmember Cunningham, for those insightful questions. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks again for having this presentation here, and just a quick follow-up, couple things. So I really appreciate this presentation. I think it's helpful for us to see it at this point, and I'm sure folks will have follow-up questions and things like the ones Councilmember Cunningham just asked. Part of why I wanted to have this presentation was for this transparency. I also know that we are in a situation in our budget where we are looking at each dollar carefully, and we are, hearing so many community needs and so many issues in our city that need attention. And so each of those budget dollars is so important. So just wanting to make sure that, of course, while we spend this money in a way that is compliant with the intended use, that we're also really looking at these dollars as reflecting the priorities for our community right now. And I do want to note just since we're having this public presentation, that Minneapolis, of course, fell just short of the population cutoff that many cities that we think of as peer cities did hit of the 500,000 population cutoff. So many cities received more money directly than we did. A lot of those funds went to Hennepin County, and our staff in the different departments, of course, health, but CPED and others are working really closely with Hennepin County, which has used CARES Act dollars as well for things in coordination with the city and the community. So that just felt important to note, along with the points that Director Intermel made about the CDBG and ESG and other targeted dollars that are going for homeless shelters and the tiny homes project and small business support and other things. I am hearing a lot from staff across the enterprise about strain and about having a challenge of just responding to priority initiatives. So I do just want to keep track of how we're prioritizing funds and make sure that those staff who are doing work have the support that we need, that we are reprioritizing city resources in the midst of these crises, because we do need to. And just hearing a concerning amount of frustration and concern from our staff. So really just looking forward to the 2021 budget in particular, just wanting to make sure that we have the right resources in the right places, and that we do understand that we need to shift away from some work or postpone things in order to really directly focus on the big issues impacting our community: the pandemic, the economic crisis, the housing crisis, the issues of violence, particularly youth violence in our community, and that we all recognize and understand that that means a shift of resources and priorities. So just a little extra context, and thanks, Madam Chair, and to the staff who are working so hard on each of these areas.
Thank you, Madam President. I do, that context is really helpful, and certainly the transparency of this process is critical and important. And I'm sure that, as you noted, that there will likely be more questions as we continue to move forward. But I do want to thank staff for pulling this together and helping to prioritize and fill some of those internal gaps as we now can begin to turn outwardly towards the community. So if there are no other questions, I will move approval of this item number 17, which includes a resolution, several actions, and the receipt of our presentation. Is there any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, I will ask clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
That carries, and that motion is approved. Colleagues, our final item today is a resolution establishing a truth and reconciliation process for the city of Minneapolis. As you all know, we are in some very difficult and challenging times in our city and our nation, and you know, a big part of really addressing these issues is we must tell the truth, and we must then begin to address that truth. And so this process will begin that journey for us as the city of Minneapolis, and as we encourage other jurisdictions, governmental agencies, foundations, corporations, all the players in our community to be a part of this process. And I will note that several of my colleagues have indicated that they would like to be sponsors of this resolution. Councilmember Cunningham, Cano, Goodman, and Schrader, and I'm sure many others will join us before we adopt this resolution on Friday. But I am going to invite Ms. Joy Marsh Stevens from the Division of Race and Equity to provide a presentation. And I will note that Councilmember Johnson has included his name on this resolution as well.
Thank you, Chair Jenkins. Committee members, I'm really excited to be here today to introduce this resolution and to provide some background context before we have a chance to read through it. I am joined today by Ebony Adedayo, who is a program manager in the Division of Race and Equity. She will walk through some context around really grounding us in this moment as we embark upon this historic journey. And then I will wrap up the presentation with some next steps and stand for any questions that you have. So I will hand it over to Ebony.
Thank you so much, Joy, and good afternoon, everyone. As Joy mentioned, I will be providing context around the Truth and Reconciliation resolution that we've been working on within the Division of Race and Equity, and leave it open for questions that you may have at the end of this presentation. So let's go to the first slide. There are lots of different definitions around what racial reconciliation is, what it means. So I thought it would be helpful for our purposes to ground us in how we are conceptualizing truth and reconciliation within our division. I recognize that as we begin to move forward in the work, some of these things may change, but feel that it's really important for us to have some shared language as we start to talk about this within the city of Minneapolis. And so according to the William Winters Institute for Racial Reconciliation at the University of Mississippi, truth and reconciliation, that process really involves three ideas. It recognizes that racism in America is both systemic and institutionalized, with far-reaching effects on both political engagement and economic opportunities for people of color. Second, reconciliation is engendered by empowering local communities through relationship building and truth telling. Lastly, justice is the essential component of the reconciliation process, justice that is best termed as restorative rather than retributive, so while still maintaining its vital punitive character. Meaning that, and so we can move to the next slide actually, as we conceptualize what reconciliation is, that there are these relational horizontal dynamics, but there are also these vertical dynamics that we want to make sure we are really addressing as we talk about reconciliation. This is really important because in the spaces that I've been a part of that have really talked about reconciliation, there's been overemphasis on the relational and the interpersonal dynamics, which are really, really important, but there is sometimes an ignorance or a resignation to not think about the policies and the systems change. And so as we approach this work within the division and within the city, we want to be careful to name that we are really excited and we are really committed to thinking about the relational aspects of reconciliation, but we're even more committed to the justice pieces. As Curtis DeYoung says, who is a scholar and thinks and writes a lot about reconciliation, reconciliation can only occur among equals. And so if we don't have that justice piece, if we keep having the inequitable outcomes that we see across our communities, we can't really begin to take advantage of the horizontal relationships within our communities. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to give a couple of ideas around where the Truth and Reconciliation process has taken place. It's a multifaceted process that has taken place in many different countries and localities around the world. And I think one of the well-known cases is South Africa after the end of apartheid, and the government really allowing people who have been oppressed because of the system to come and share their grievances, but also allowed white Africans to come and share how they have been perpetuators of injustice in that system over a period of time. Rwanda also had a Truth and Reconciliation process after the war and genocide in 1904 and 1997. There is also documentation around Canada's own reconciliation process when it really pertained to the legacy of Indian residential schools and giving people that had been a part of American Indians who had been a part of that to give them an opportunity to share their experiences, what had happened, the impact of that. And then Sierra Leone after the end of the 11-year civil war as well. And we do have some background research on some of these things. And so if there's an interest there, we can always share them with you. And these are just a few examples of how like these massive reconciliation processes have been rooted and grounded in governments and communities around the world to bring people to a healing space after conflict. One episode that's not up here is Bosnia, when there was that civil war that happened right before Rwanda in 1992 and 1993. And so they even had a Truth and Reconciliation process as well. Let's move to the next slide to talk about why we feel like the Truth and Reconciliation process is really appropriate for the city of Minneapolis. As we have mentioned, the reconciliation process is really about that horizontal, that relational dynamic in terms of relationships as we are thinking about and pursuing the justice pieces. And we all know like a lot of the things that have happened within the city of Minneapolis, not just currently, but historically. Let's move to the next slide. And so I want to give people an opportunity to think about what you're seeing here on this screen. Land stolen from people and people stolen from land. Just on Monday, we commemorated Indigenous Peoples Day, and the city of Minneapolis passed a resolution honoring that in place of Columbus Day back in 2013, 2014. We also passed a resolution honoring the 400-year commemoration just last year and the legacy of African Americans who have been stolen from our original continent, our original home, for the purposes of labor and reproduction here in America. And so when we think about this, I invite you to pay attention to what's happening and showing up in your body. These are really hard slides to digest. And so I don't want us to miss this moment. Perhaps as you look at the slide, you are noticing racing thoughts, a buzzing sensations in your ears, sweaty palms. Because our bodies remember, even when we don't want to remember, our bodies remember these things. Or maybe you're sensing calm, you're experiencing spaciousness in your chest, or you're noticing an interest in making eye contact with others. Or maybe you have no idea what this is about or what I've just said. You weren't paying attention. Your body feels blah, and now you want to go home and take a nap. If you had to place yourself on a spectrum of how much and how intensely you're experiencing the activation and energy in your body right now, because of the slide, where would you land? And I ask this as a reflective question, not so that we're gonna open it up for a discussion, but I really want to set the context for why this Truth and Reconciliation process is so important for our city. As I talked about in the previous slides, many of these Truth and Reconciliation processes have occurred soon after, right after injustices have happened to people. But as we look at these slides, we are talking about a legacy that's 500-600 years old within the city of Minneapolis alone. What's coming up for you as we do that? So we're talking about a legacy that is 500-600 years old. As we do that, let's move to the next slide. We know that there are things that are within our present day that continue to make the case for why this work is important. Our ongoing racial disparities. In spite of the fact that Minnesota promotes itself to be within the progressive North, we have some of the worst racial disparities within our nation. We often say that it's better to live up north than it is to live down south. And yet we compete with some of the most racist southern states in terms of unemployment, health disparities, housing disparities, education, all of those different things. We continue to have some of the worst incidents of police brutality within the city of Minneapolis, Milwaukee, and other northern cities and states. And so as you look at this word cloud, Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, Thurman Blevins, George Floyd, within the space of a few years, not to mention all of the people who preceded them. We think about the Dakota 38 and the war against the Dakota back in the as Lincoln was signing the Emancipation Proclamation for African Americans the very next day, signing in order to execute 38 Dakota people. We think about the missing Indigenous women. We think about redlining. We think about the Plymouth Avenue riots. We think about the American Indian movement. We think about NIMBYism. We think about racial covenants and sex trafficking and so many other things that continue to happen to American Indians and African Americans year after year after year. This is why, and this is how we are grounding this work around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Our bodies remember what happened to our ancestors hundreds of years ago, but we're still facing and it's still happening to us today, which makes the work even more urgent in this moment because we can't escape it. Our communities continue to feel these injustices. And so I want to, as we think about all those things, I want to pass it to Joy to talk about what our next steps are in regards to this resolution and this work within the division and within the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you, Ebony, for providing that powerful context and for reminding us of truly not just how historic this moment is for us, but how important it is for us to be very thoughtful and intentional as we embark upon a truth and reconciliation process for the city. We can go to the next slide. So what we have written here is actually a portion of the resolution that speaks specifically to direction to staff to begin this work, looking to the Division of Race and Equity clearly in relationship with so many other areas of the city, minimally the mayor's office, city council, the civil rights department, the city coordinator's office, the city attorney's office, the city clerk, and other departments in the city, really just to ground ourselves before we get too far down the path, really grounding ourselves in understanding what it is that we want to commit to. Chair Jenkins and Ebony both spoke very eloquently to the significance of the moment, not just the moment, but the reality of our historically Black residents of the city, as well as American Indian residents of the city, and the need for us to really prioritize this work, but we want to make sure that in doing so, we have some clarity as a locality around what experts are saying about how to actually embark on a truth and reconciliation process. As Ebony illustrated in the earlier slide, this is not a common process for a city in the US to take on, and so we want to be thoughtful. We want to be reaching out and understanding what experts are saying, both locally and nationally. And also those who are skilled in conflict resolution to help inform the work that we do here. We also want to examine our internal capacity to think about what does it mean for the city of Minneapolis to take on this work. This is legacy work. This is not the type of process that we embark upon and then wrap up in 6 months, but this is something that we as a city will want to commit to do well. Because the disparities that we're seeing within our historically Black and American Indian communities are not a new reality for us, we know that truly embarking upon a process like this is going to require us to do so with some long-term fortitude to sustain this process in order to actually build trust where trust does not exist and actually engage deeply in the healing process. We also intend to bring forth a recommendation after we've done this research, after we've actually done some internal looking and organizational capacity assessment, bring back a recommendation on how we actually proceed in forming a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What's the role of the city? What's the role of community? What's the role of external partners, be they philanthropic or other government partners or the private sector? And the voice of community within shaping how we actually move that process forward. Our intention is to bring forth that recommendation back to the City Council, to this specific committee of City Council in the first meeting in January 2021. Chair Jenkins, that is the end of our presentation. We can stand for questions at this time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stevens and Ms. Adadeo. Are there any questions at this point? Any questions? As you all were going through the presentations, all of my colleagues on the City Council have indicated they would like to be authors, co-authors of this resolution, this historic resolution, as was noted, and this legacy work. First, we'll hear from Councilmember Goodman, then Councilmember Bender.
I did not.
I'm sorry. I do deeply apologize. Not Councilmember Goodman, Councilmember Gordon.
But I will say something if you want me to.
Please do. My apologies. The G and the O threw me off a little bit, and so Councilmember.
Not at all, my friend. I guess what I want to say more than anything else is that I want to thank you and Joy and your team for bringing this issue to us. I think it's really important that everyone from the community really understand the importance of truth and reconciliation, and I just want you to know, Council Vice President and staff, that I am willing to step up and be your partner, learn what I don't know, communicate what I do, and hold your hand as we all hold hands together to face these past injustices and try to figure out what we can do at this point in time to help our community heal and move forward. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman, and I apologize, Councilmember Gordon, you are next in queue.
Well, thank you very much, and I think that Gordon and Goodman are well aligned right here. So Lisa took the words probably right out of my mouth. I really appreciate this work, and I'm all in as well, and am excited to see this coming forward. I did want to maybe share my concern about resources and capacity, and I think we should, as we're thinking about this work, be maybe willing to look at what we have in the budget right now that could possibly support this, and there might even be a case for making a budget amendment to make sure that we have the right kind of resources. I know that one of the things we want to do is consult with other experts. Of course, here, whenever we see the word consult, we think that sometimes means consultants, and sometimes consultants should be compensated. So let's think about that. I know we're early in our budget process, but I'm so glad to see this coming forward, And I would just maybe softly suggest that if there are budget implications that our staff can think of, and you don't have to talk about it right now, but maybe that's something we should be discussing amongst ourselves with recommendations from staff to see what we can do to make sure to support this. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something we can do quickly, and it's going to take a lot of credibility even to build it out. So there could be a lot of reasons why we might want some other expertise and leadership from our community or from outside our community. And I know we have experts in the city who've even done this kind of process in countries around the world and have some experiences and think would even be anxious and willing and eager to join some kind of coalition. I know we've talked about a commission already, but that could help do this work. So let's keep that in mind too and make sure that we're giving this the kind of support that it needs to be as successful as it can be.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Gordon. I think your comments are right on point. Resources will be necessary. Really need to develop the trust of community in this process, which I think really begs us to seriously consider outside facilitation, consultants, and maybe even this becomes a standalone process of that commission and others, but certainly needs the support and participation of the city of Minneapolis in the process. And to your point around budget, the mayor has indicated some resources. Certainly we will need more, but I want to bring in our next speaker, commenter, Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments are similar, but I wanted to say that I'm so grateful to you and Ms. Marsh-Stevens and the team for bringing this forward as its own standalone work, as it deserves to be. And I think at first, for a while, it was sort of combined in with some other things in a way that really didn't honor what needs to happen with this standalone truth and reconciliation process. And I know we all know that as we continue here, we will have to make decisions. We're making decisions every day as policymakers and staff in this context, in the context of racial inequity in our community. And I know we're all doing our best to really address race equity in each of those decisions, but this history persists in so many ways. And so allowing this work to have the space it needs at the pace it needs to be taken, really truly directed by our community, is going to mean us, I think, kind of changing how we think about policymaking and solving problems and really listening. And I think we've had some recent experiences that show us what happens when we open our minds to what's possible. And we don't, our system is set up with a lot of rules and a lot of kind of ways things are always done. And we have a lot of change makers on the city council. We have a lot of change leaders in our staff. So I think we're at a time where more than ever, we need to just really open ourselves up to the possibilities of what will come from our community and just really start by listening and not sort of writing anything off or saying no or can't or not possible. So just thanks again for your leadership. I just also wanted to speak to offer my support for this, and especially, especially kind of regrouping with its own standalone process with the resources that it needs and deserves, both right now and then in the years to come. I think what Dr. Marsh-Stevens said is so true, that this is not a short-term process we're undertaking. It's something we need to commit to for the long term.
Thank you, Madam President. So next we'll hear from Councilmember Cunningham, and then I know Ms. Stevens would like to help respond to some of the resource questions that Councilmember Gordon brought up. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Council Vice President, but I will go ahead and defer to Director Stevens so she can address Councilmember Gordon's question, and then I'll come back.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Stevens?
Yes, sure. Chair Jenkins, committee members, to Councilmember Gordon's question, I want to lift up the recast program that we have been running now in the Division of Race and Equity for 4 years. We are getting into our 5th year, and one of the key premises around that program is on building greater trust and understanding between community and the city. Many of the tenants within the program that we've been running for the last 4 years speak very directly to the work that we're doing, that we're embarking upon now around truth and reconciliation. And as we embark on our final year of the recast grant, I can't imagine a more fitting way for us through a policy measure to be taking these steps together. So to that end, we have already set aside a significant portion of that programmatic dollars for year 5 to initiate this process. As I indicated earlier in those next steps, our goal is to begin this work as quickly as possible, not waiting for 2021 budget in order to do so. And to your point, Councilmember Gordon, as well, intending to bring on some outside resource support in order to move it. We know that this is not a small body of work, and as city staff, we're not sitting around with the capacity necessarily to take this on, nor do we want to position ourselves as the definitive experts in the work. So my intention is to use existing dollars in our recast funds to begin this work, to secure some consultative support to initiate the process and to ultimately guide us through as long as we can. But to Council Vice President Jenkins' earlier point, we will need to think long term, because this is, again, legacy work that we're building on how we support the process on an ongoing basis.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stevens. And now we can go back to Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Ebony and Director Mark Stevens for this presentation and this work, and thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership in this as well. I am really excited about this work. I have felt so strongly for the need for this work for quite some time, and I know that this has been brewing for a while, and so I'm just so excited to see it coming to fruition, for there to be a framework and an understanding of how the work will start. And so I'm just really excited about it, and know that it's desperately needed in my community in North Minneapolis. The city has caused tremendous harm in North Minneapolis, and quite frankly continues to do so even unintentionally. And I, as a council member, take my role very seriously of changing that dynamic and relationship between the city and North Minneapolis. But I am one person, and we're talking about a system, an institution that is so much bigger than one person, even an elected official. So I'm so grateful to see a process and methodology as to how we go about doing this work, because I live in the midst of it every single day, not only as a descendant of slaves myself, but living in North Minneapolis, seeing the concrete harm that has been caused by the system of the city of Minneapolis. I have a little bit of a, I guess I would like to just kind of have a bit of a conversation, because it's something that I've had a hard time, I almost said reconciling, but had a hard time figuring out how to put together. Is, Ebony, you had talked about the reconciliation being amongst peers, and I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to like there has to be like equal power. Well, when you have elected officials or say police, you know, you have folks who are in positions of power, how do we bridge that gap between like the power differential as we think about how we navigate this work? Because I do a lot of work interpersonally. I have a lot of connections and relationships with folks in my community, but there's always that power dynamic. And so I'm just curious about, I'm all on board. You all know, like, let's get in and do this justice-oriented work, change those systems and change policies. But I'm curious about like how it might be a little bit too detailed, but maybe high level, how do we navigate that power differential with the reconciliation process?
And so I think we're getting into some philosophical territory right now, and just digging through some of the research around like what reconciliation is, what the processes are. I'll, give my best answer at that. And then if Joy has anything, or maybe someone else has something that they want to chime in, I do think that you actually bring up a really great point here in terms of like, how do we actually pursue this when there's so much unequal power dynamics within our city, within elected officials, police, schools, so many different things that really point to how unequal the city is. And so reconciliation only occurs among equals, people that have equal access to resources and power. And so that's one of the reasons why I said we need to pursue the relational dynamics and changing how we relate to one another. One of the beautiful things we're doing within the Division of Race and Equity that has been had opportunity for other staff to participate in across the enterprise is this embodied anti-racism work. That work has been really critically important for the city staff, for me, for other people to participate in, and how we relate with one another in this embodied way so that we can confront and push back against against racism. So I think that that's a strategy, but I think the other piece is that we really have to address the inequities that we continue to produce within the city. And so we can't talk about reconciliation if we're going to continue to have the housing gap, if we're going to continue to have the unemployment gap, if our Black men and children and our Indigenous people are going to continue to be shot in the street, if Indigenous women are going to continue to go missing. We can't honestly have a conversation about reconciliation unless we're willing to address that. And so that's why I said we have to take care of the relational pieces, but we have got to take care of the structural pieces. Otherwise, we're just having a come to Jesus, kumbaya, cathartic moment where we're going to come and cry and feel really good. And at the end of the day, we're going back to our communities and things are the same way. We can't do that. And if you look at historical examples, in South Africa, I think South Africa is a really prime example of what I'm talking about, is that like one of the reasons why the South African government really wanted that truth and reconciliation process was to have a peaceful transition from the white African way of ruling things under apartheid to Black rulership without bloodshed, right? But if you ask Black South Africaners who still remain, there's still a lot of ongoing injustices and unequal access to resources. And just because that power shifted in terms of government, that didn't mean that Black people got their land back. That didn't mean that Black people got more housing or economic opportunities. And so like, if we're gonna really pursue this, we have to pursue this with integrity to say that we have to address the relational pieces, but we have got to take care of the structural, because if we don't, we will keep producing the inequities and we'll keep producing the harm that happens interpersonally.
I really appreciate.
And then we need to consult some experts around this. Like I have some knowledge around this, and I'm sure that any amount of us on this call have knowledge around what this will take. But to Council Vice President Jenkins and Joy point, we need to bring in people who are going to help nurture and guide this process.
Yes, I really appreciate that. And I'm okay with a little philosophical right now, to be honest, because it's like we're still kind of in that space. So I like getting into that too. I think that one of, just kind of thinking systemically, one of the barriers that we're going to face, and I stand at the ready to be of support, is the fact that we are completely inhibited by race neutral requirements. And, so like, how do we undo harm to Black and Indigenous communities when we can't explicitly say these resources are going for Black or Indigenous people, right? And so I'm just like naming that as like a systemic barrier that we're going to have to work through together. And I'm at the ready to be of support in any way as we navigate this. Thank you so much for all you do, and thank you for your answers.
Thank you, everyone, for this really important discussion and commitment to this process. And again, I want to just note that this is just the beginning. We want to, we don't anticipate that this work will be done by January 2021. We just want to hear the progress that has been made to date. At that point in time, this has been a process leading up to this thus far. We established in I believe 2015 the Division of Race and Equity at the City of Minneapolis, and then this council, our entire strategic planning process was our strategic race and strategic racial equity plan. And then we declared racism as a public health crisis. And now we're beginning to look at reimagining our public safety systems in our city. And all of these things will lead to this work around truth and reconciliation. So I just want to really thank all of those who have been involved in this effort to date, Ms. Ebony Adebayo, Ms. Joy Mar-Stevens and her team, Larice and Nick and Lalinda, Casey Carl, the city clerk, has really been instrumental in putting this together, as well as city coordinator Mark Ruff, my staff, Diva Sadar and Zoe Beaujeret have really been active participants in helping to get us to this point. And so just really want to thank you all. Seeing that there's no more discussion, I will move approval of this item. You need discussion? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to go ahead and call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellison.
Aye.
Chair Jenkins.
Aye.
Yeah, 13 ayes.
That item carries and that motion is approved. And this committee's recommendation will be forwarded to our regular scheduled council meeting this coming Friday for final action. Colleagues, I just want to leave us with one paragraph from the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. His name is Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. And he says, we must continuously reflect on ourselves so we can reflect on our society. We must continuously strive to be anti-racist so we can build an anti-racist society. An anti-racist society is not governed by fear and hate and cynicism, but one of equity and justice and truth. An anti-racist society governed by curiosity and love and hope, honoring humanity in all of its fullness. And with that, we have concluded all business to come before this committee today, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.